chaleureux. Même quand nous nous retrouvons dans ce programme important, vous aurez le temps de visiter le Kenya et vous allez jouir de ce pays spectaculaire, voir la créativité, la passion et les talents des jeunes Kenyans. Nous reconnaissons également que nous sommes ici autour, donc nous nous réunissons à un moment de grande incertitude, une grande inflation, la polarisation, donc les inégalités qui s'accentuent et l'avancée de la technologie sauvage qui pose problème dans le monde entier. En plus, il y a la guerre au cœur de l'Europe. Son impact se fait sentir dans le monde entier. En plus de cela, il y a également la menace du changement climatique, qui est une menace même pour la survie de l'humanité. En Afrique, les résultats sont catastrophiques, la sécheresse. Mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais partager avec vous les statistiques. Plus de 17 millions de personnes chaque année sont affectées par les vents, les sécheresses ainsi que les éboulements de terrain. Plus de 7 millions de personnes en Afrique sont déplacées par des catastrophes naturelles. Plus de 145 millions de personnes n'ont pas assez de nourriture. Dans tout ceci, l'Afrique est responsable de moins de 5% des émissions de carbone venant des outils fossiles, comme le secrétaire général Gutiérrez a dit que c'est le moment, le changement climatique, le réchauffement a changé, mais c'est maintenant l'ébullition du continent. Nous sommes
particularly from the Rift Valley, that Homo sapiens set off eons ago and several millennia later have come to dominate the planet. The progress and advances made in that period are impressive, but they have come at a price. Our ailing planet and the existential...
It goes, here meeting in Gekua email. It goes, here meeting in Gekua email. How many Kenyans know that? See some hands. Now, I share that because we've come together, we've convened, we are meeting, we are deliberating, we've taken the time. We must ensure this translates into action for impact. Otherwise, we could just have sent an email.
And the action we are seeking here at the Africa Climate Summit is a pathway that will take Africa's realities and climate needs into account. We want a global financial architecture that helps Africa grow and the world decarbonize. We want to unlock investments Africa needs to tap into its potential and resources. This summit is about creating a new narrative for climate action in Africa, building consensus and taking a unified step forward. Twende kazi.
Absolutely, let's do it. And say, just before we introduce the minister and ask her to come up, I want to settle the room and I want to rally us. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're taking your seats, can we please make a commitment that we will act following this summit, that we will collaborate, that action is critical and impact is critical? Could we give a round of applause to show our intent, our commitment, a promise to ourselves and the next generations? Thank you so much. Zain, would you introduce the minister?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you everybody here for being here and for your commitment for what we're trying to do here. It is so important for Africa today and for all future generations. So to begin, it is my privilege to introduce our Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, the Honorable Soipan Tuya.
Your Excellency, Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya and Chairperson of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, His Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, Dr. Simon Still, the Executive Director, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Her Excellency, Dr. Monique Nzanzabanganawa, Deputy Chairperson of the AU, Her Excellency, Ambassador Josepha Sako, AU Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, Blue Economy and Sustainable Environment, His Excellency, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam Desalegn, the Right Honorable Baroness Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, colleague ministers from Africa and across the globe, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am very honored to welcome you to Nairobi, our beautiful green city in the sun. Today, I stand before you filled with pride and hope. As we begin discussions at the Africa Climate Summit, we look forward to your support towards an ambitious agenda to change the perception on the place of Africa in the global efforts to combat the climate change crisis. The journey that got us here today has been long in the making, thanks to the very visionary leadership of our heads of state and government, who took no less than 3 assembly decisions at the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th African Union Assembly sittings to make this African Climate Summit a reality. In a bold and courageous move, His Excellency, Dr. William Ruto, President of Kenya, at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November 2022, did announce and offered to host the inaugural Africa Climate Summit here in Nairobi in his capacity as the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. Excellencies, honorable colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that moment is finally here with us. And I wish to express my profound gratitude to the African Union Commission as co-hosts of this summit, and especially to my sister Ambassador Josepha Sako, who together with her talented and dedicated team made sure that we were in strict adherence to the African Union instruments governing the hosting of summits. I am also very indebted to my colleague ministers of environment who have shown tremendous support and guidance and insight throughout this journey. The same goes to the African group of negotiators who have been guiding us through the process and supporting it up to where we are today. Ladies and gentlemen, our overarching goal for this summit is to chart a green growth pathway for the African continent, setting the stage for Africa to lead the globe towards a more ecologically responsible global industrialization, catalyzed by financing that is accessible, adequate, and affordable. Consequently, the summit does present to us, Africa, an opportunity to develop and present a new and bold vision for Africa as a continent with tremendous potential, abundant opportunities that can be used to solve the climate crisis. I therefore call upon all of us here to use the next 3 days to explore options as to how we can optimize Africa's abundant human and natural resources to leapfrog towards a low-carbon economy while opening new opportunities for climate finance, trade, investment, innovation, resilience, and green jobs. Excellencies, honorable colleagues, the climate change debate has entered a new era. It is no longer just about tackling an environmental or development problem, but about addressing climate change in the context of justice. We must look at African countries and their high debt distress, contextualizing it with our ability to adapt and mitigate climate change. We must look at the impact of climate change to our economies, which are heavily dependent on climate-sensitive sectors, such as agriculture, tourism, fisheries, energy, and forestry, among others. We must also be cognizant of the climate change nexus with migration and the need to climate-proof our infrastructure. That is why we are persuaded that if we do not develop adequate response measures to deal with the climate change crisis, it will crush us all together. Let us therefore step up and lead the world to find solutions for climate change by listening to all voices at this climate summit, including from youth, indigenous communities, and civil society from Africa and beyond. As I conclude, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to convey goodwill and urge you all to take time during your visit and sample our rich wildlife and cultural heritage. Her Excellency, Ambassador Sako, and myself wish at this early stage to extend an invitation, since this is a ministerial, we are beginning today, to invite you all later on to dinner this evening and more deliberations so that we can firm up the outcomes that we want to see coming out of this summit. Thank you very much, and I will now take this opportunity to usher in our youth representative, Ms. Elizabeth Wathuti, who has been, for the last 3 days, have led a group of young people from across the continent to put together very solid resolutions, ideas, and very visionary indeed, group of young people who are joining in the discussion and want to be part of the action. They say they no longer want to be bystanders. They want to be right on the table. Welcome, Elizabeth, and your team.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, invited guests, I stand on the observed protocol. After months of regional and national consultations, mobilization that accumulated into uniting youth from every nook and cranny of the continent here for the last 3 days to exchange and voice our concerns, we stand today, Sad Ukas from the Kingdom of Morocco, Dion Shukuza from the Republic of Namibia, and I, Elizabeth Wathuti, from the host country of Kenya, the land of beautiful landscapes and the greatest marathoners, as representatives of the African Youth Climate Assembly, to underscore the urgency of addressing climate change and its profound impact on Africa's youth. Our declaration, the African Youth Climate Declaration, reflects our commitment to harness the power of our youth to drive meaningful change. The African Youth Climate Assembly's vision is rooted in inclusivity, resilience, innovation, and the conviction that young people are one of the biggest resources that Africa is endowed with. We seek to elevate youth participation and inclusion in climate governance, forging pathways towards sustainable development and green growth. And we urge you, our esteemed leaders, to join hands with us in this endeavor. And we have our key asks from the Youth Declaration that I will invite my good friends from the Kingdom of Morocco and Namibia to present.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I stand on all observed protocol. The first demand that the Youth Climate Assembly came up with reads as follows. We oblige upon the key stakeholders to recognize, promote, and invest in the decision of the African Youth Climate Assembly to establish the Assembly as the principal forum for consolidating, meaningfully enhancing the coordination of youth engagement in the climate governance across member states beyond the Africa Climate Summit, and also further urge the key stakeholders to support youth inclusion in advancing Africa's sustainable development goals and the green growth agenda in continental forums. Further, engage the African Union Commission's Youth Division and Department of Sustainable Environment and Blue Economy to integrate the African Youth Climate Assembly into their structures, aligning, most importantly, with Article 19 of the African Youth Charter on Sustainable Development and Protection of the Environment. We further oblige upon parties to create an international or intergenerational green investment fund to generate green jobs for African youth. We would like to stress on this point that this was one of the most highlighted points from the consultations and also the engagements, financing youth action for climate. Further, lobby for the established United Nations Youth Office to be domiciled in Africa in line with structuring a global multilateral climate institution. We further also applaud on creating adaptation jobs for young people and equipping them with entrepreneurial skills for solutions and thus fostering resilient livelihoods. Further, engage Africa's youth as advocates for increased access to renewable energy. Engage youth in exploring Africa's agricultural potential, in particular to meet the food security challenges of the continent. And lastly, to invest in youth-led research and innovation for identifying local climate solutions. And with those few demands, I would give my brother Saad Ukas a chance to give us a closing statement. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, in conclusion, our vision encompasses green investments, renewable energy, adaptation initiatives, and youth-led innovation. Your children are watching you today. We have to trust you, and you have to trust us. We call upon you leaders to enable us and stand with us in this crucial mission. Climate justice and sustainability are within our reach, and if not, one day we will be here at your place and with our countries burning and drowning, and you will not be there to save us. If we want to go far, we have to go together, join our hands to save our continent. Ubuntu.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is a truly diverse and multi-ethnic continent. The indigenous peoples of Africa are often on the front line of the effects of climate change. To discuss with us today the indigenous people's perspective on climate change, please put your hands together to welcome Ms. Anne Samante.
Hey, bana ba Kenya namugeze ndi mulembe gundi kwaya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko ulaiwa kubanenda kama tunda ko buru mu Kenya.
Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Arap Ruto, and all other excellencies, distinguished guests, Madam CS, Honorable Soipan Tuya, all protocols observed, good morning. My name is Samantha Ann. I'm here to read a statement on behalf of Indigenous peoples of Africa. We, the African Indigenous peoples from 20 countries, gathered in the pre-summit held in Nairobi in the past 2 days in preparation for this summit today, appreciate the Africa Climate Summit Secretariat and the government of Kenya, as led by our able President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, for the continued recognition of Indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge as a contribution to African climate change discourses. The role that African Indigenous peoples play in protecting critical ecosystems across the continent makes them major actors in combating climate change. Furthermore, given that our livelihoods are based on direct use of natural resources, Indigenous peoples are unfortunately the most hit hardest by climate crisis, notwithstanding the fact that we have the lowest carbon footprint, or rather the lowest emitters. As the African Climate Summit commences today, our main concerns and requests are as follows. One, on clean and renewable energy and energy transition. As we are all aware, all renewable energy initiatives are all around Indigenous peoples' territories. For us, there is no idle land. For us, the so-called idle land is our fathers' grazing land. This is our area of our cultural, where we undertake our cultural rights. And so to us, any investment around renewable energy must take into consideration free, prior, and informed consent. Moreover, renewable energy investment should ensure to ease mobility of Indigenous peoples, because through mobility, by ensuring mobility, then it means you've helped us to be more resilient, and the vice versa is true. On adaptation and resilience to climate risk, we are not only victims, but we also come with solutions. Our traditional knowledge and ways of life enable us to build resilience and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Furthermore, considering that there are an estimated 50 million Indigenous peoples living in 5 regions of African countries, whose participation and contribution through Indigenous peoples' knowledge and knowledge system provides tremendous solution to the climate change crisis. However, as much as we contribute this much to climate resilience and adaptation, our knowledge and traditional adaptation resilience are not mainstreamed in local and regional policy and legislation frameworks. Therefore, we request this summit to recognize the contribution of Indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, which make them more resilient to climate change. On climate finance for adaptation and resilience, despite the fact that we do play a critical role in protecting the ecosystem that our lives entirely depends on, a recent study has shown that Indigenous peoples receive less than 1% of all climate financing globally. Indigenous peoples of Africa continue to be obstructed from direct access to finance due to lack of recognition of our unique identity. Lack of clear policy, legal framework, and complex requirements continue to limit our direct access to climate financing, yet, as I said earlier, we are the most hit by the crisis of climate change. We therefore request for establishment of an Indigenous Peoples Climate Resilience Fund to mitigate against the impacts of climate change. On effective participation, and as climate change discourse continues to gain traction, the Indigenous peoples, despite being the most vulnerable group, has continued to face systemic exclusion from decision-making, and also have negatively impacted by the climate intervention, negatively impacted by the climate intervention and response measures, some of which are detrimental to the existence of Indigenous people. During this summit and beyond, we request for effective and meaningful participation of African Indigenous peoples, including creation of an African Union focal point at the AU headquarters to have an Indigenous person focal point who will be handling our matters at the AU. In conclusion, we reiterate again that although Indigenous peoples contribute the less to carbon emissions that lead to climate change challenges, we continue to suffer the most. We are therefore here with solutions and experiential lessons from Mama Africa. We look forward to have our concerns, priority, and contribution captured in the summit's outcome document, which is the Nairobi Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the summit is steeped in democracy, and with good reason, because the climate crisis affects everybody. In the last 3 days, we have had very robust engagements during the 11th Climate Change and Development in Africa Conference, held between the 1st to the 3rd of September, just ended yesterday. And this is a forum convened by the AU, UNECA, the Africa Development Bank, as well as the Kenyan government and the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and to bring to us the voice and sentiments from the civil society is our next speaker, Dr. Mithika Mwenda. Let's put our hands together for Mithika.
Thank you, CS. Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the Deputy President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to stand by existing protocols. It is with great honor that I address you today, first, as the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, representing the African civil society, and secondly, wearing the hat of the larger non-state actors steering committee for the African Climate Summit, which has been meeting since the announcement by Kenya of hosting this all-important summit in February this year. As we gather here in Nairobi for this inaugural Africa Climate Summit, I can't help but feel the weight of the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. For many years, the climate change negotiations under the UNFCCC have remained a contestation between North and South, with deepening mistrust and the widening divide between North and South about two actions that should reverse the impacts of the challenge that poses existential threat to the survival of humanity and the planet, that is adaptation and mitigation. The outcome of this summit, then, should seek to not only provide a neutral ground for conversation and restore hope and dignity for millions of people whose livelihoods have been turned upside down due to the ranging climate impacts manifested by shifting seasons, drying rivers, erratic rainfall, diseases, compounding food crises, and forced solutions, but should also be responsive to African people's realities, aspirations, desires, and imperatives of climate justice. Top of these should be adaptation, underpinned by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It is not just about coping with the impacts of climate change, but also about enhancing our solidarity in prosperity, resilience, reducing our risk, and seizing the opportunities which are coming with this challenge. Yes, Africa, with the most progressive position in international dialogue on climate change, has pronounced itself on what we require in adaptation and mitigation. And the all standards show that we are doing more than our fair share in the global efforts to combat this crisis. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa needs between 160 to 340 billion US dollars by 2030 for adaptation, while the current flows are only around 16 billion annually, a fraction of a budget for a blue chip company and foundations attending this summit. We need a deep conversation on how to address this, including achieving the balanced financing between adaptation and mitigation, as delaying action now will result in exponential costs in the future. This summit should also convey a bold, unequivocal message from Africa that it is not a forum to end the industrialized countries, to escape their historical responsibilities, and transfer the burden of action to the victims of their actions, but a platform to once again renew our call to honor their commitments on deep and genuine emission reduction, adequate support to vulnerable, and support the communities at the front line of climate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, we want to extend a hand of partnership and take front seat in the inevitable transition to low carbon, climate resilient, fair, equitable, and ecologically just development pathways. We should also seek to change the narratives, and I think I have heard His Excellency President speaking about that every time. And we need also reciprocal actions from our partners in the North, and urge them not to shift the goalpost like they have done before. I hope, Your Excellency, you will agree with me that we are doing so much, but there is a problem. We have the critical natural resources, for instance, including vast mineral resources, cobalt, lithium, and all others, which will drive this transition. How to exploit these resources, then, should be the conversation we should have. How we leverage them will determine whether we repeat the curse of the minerals driving the carbon-addicted industrial revolution, that is through fossil fuels, which has brought us the current challenges we have. Or we will choose to start with an opportunity to shape our future through a resilient, prosperous, inclusive, and fair way. This is really our time. And thank you again, Your Excellency. When we were in South Africa during the African Parliamentarian Summit on Climate Policy and Equity, I told you, you are our general. And I told you, now below there, you have a soldier. Let us work together, and we promise our commitment to that process. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mithika, for speaking on behalf of the civil society. Now, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we move on, noting that the vital agenda pursued this week, the ACS will play a crucial part in the global fight against climate change and have a massive impact in the upcoming global initiatives around climate action. And one of these is the COP28. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are aware that during this summit, we have the African Climate Week convened by the UNFCCC as part of the regional climate weeks, again, that build momentum for COP28. And we have here with us none other than the Executive Director of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Simon Stiell. Let us put our hands together to have the statements from Simon. Welcome, Simon.
Excellencies, ministers, colleagues, friends, I'm honored to be here at the Africa Climate Summit and the first of 4 regional climate weeks of 2023. I want to thank the Kenyan government and personally President Ruto for his leadership and vision in bringing us here together. And I want special recognition for Minister Soipan Tuya for her work and efforts in helping to organize both the summit and the climate weeks. This summit for Africa, by Africa, will help us tackle the climate crisis we see and feel all around the world. I speak to you today not just as the head of the UNFCCC, but as the former minister from a developing country. So let us talk about what we can do to stabilize the climate and build resilient societies in Africa and throughout the world. Development is, as it should be, a priority. I know personally the destruction that climate-related disasters can wreak on years of development. But the world is asking for a lot. Develop, but don't do it in the carbon-intensive way that we did in the past. Therefore, it is a global responsibility to collectively work out how we do that. Every day this week, we'll be putting our heads together to discuss how to build resilience to climate risks, transition to a low-emission economy, and collaborate on solutions, transforming our economies through a just transition that benefits all sectors of society. Africa, the equal partner in this endeavor, is offering its huge potential. We already know innovation in Africa is astounding. So how can we accelerate this development through green technology and energy? And in doing so, taking the necessary actions to keep in 1.5 within reach. First, we must address finance. Climate action, just like everything else in life, costs money. Finance should be viewed in the context of mitigation and adaptation, in addition to all of the other things. COP28 will be a critical moment to hold the line on temperature rise at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The world needs to reduce emissions by 43% from 2019 levels by 2030 to achieve this. And the IPCC reports the impacts will be far greater at anything above this, especially in certain parts of the world. So for starters, to hold this off, we immediately need to see the delivery of the pledged $100 billion, a doubling of adaptation finance, the substantial replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, a global finance system, both public and finance, that is aligned with action and green finance. At COP27, I committed to ensure the Secretariat does all that it can to support parties to deliver on their commitments. I see our role as catching what you, parties, throw and shine light on how you can, together, throw it higher to get it in the basket. I also committed to maximizing the opportunities available to us to build collaboration throughout the year between COPs. This Africa Climate Week is a good example on delivering just that. In the past, we used to have only 3 to 4 mandated events associated with the regional climate weeks. Now there are 20. We've been working to cluster them, not just for efficient and resource saving's sake, but also because it is here, in the regions, where catalytic connections are made, and we can supercharge action on the ground. I want to see Africa Climate Week usher in climate action in 3 pivotal fronts. First, it must enable governments to amplify their contributions and commitments. Second, strengthen regional bonds and collaboration. And third, and perhaps most profoundly, empower local transformation so that African nations can come to COP28, which is less than 100 days away, in leading action and ambition. At COP28, the first global stocktake will review our progress on climate action. No, we are not on track. Our response to those findings is a key opportunity to course correct towards a sustainable future. In addition, we must respond to those impacts we know cannot be averted through our approach to loss and damage and the operationalization of the fund and funding arrangements at COP28. The discussions taking place here will inform the global stocktake about the challenges, barriers, and opportunities for climate action and support within the context of Africa. The UNFCCC Secretariat can work with you to identify the opportunities for Africa and facilitate the solutions and to attain those opportunities. Excellencies, ministers, the world is counting on your continued collaboration and leadership. I thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Next, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is my turn to introduce Her Excellency Josepha Sako, who is the African Union Commissioner in charge of agriculture, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable development. Welcome, my sister. You have been extremely instrumental in helping us co-host this summit.
Thank you, Cabinet Minister, to give me the floor. Good morning, every one of you. Let me acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya and coordinator of the Committee of Head of State and Government on Climate Change of African Union. His Excellency Azali Assoumani, the President of the Union of Comoros and current African Union Chairperson. His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, the Excellencies Head of States and Government from Africa and abroad, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, if he's present, His Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, honorable ministers present, executive head of international organizations, representative of the civil organization, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. On behalf of the African Union Commission, I am pleased to welcome you all to the African Climate Summit and to thank all delegates from Africa and the world at large for setting time aside of your busy schedule to participate at this inaugural African Climate Summit. You are welcome. Karibu. Sejam bem-vindo. Vous êtes le bienvenu. Merci. Your participation is a clear demonstration of our unwavering commitment to collectively shape the future of climate change, climate action in Africa and across the world. We are not isolated. We are following the global agenda. Although we are not the polluters, our responsibility is just 4%, but we cannot isolate because the climate issue, it's really affecting all of us globally, the planet, and we need a sound planet for the next generation. That's why in the continent we are fully committed in this agenda, and I really commend President Ruto for his commitment on this climate agenda. Congratulations, Excellency President. Let me also like to acknowledge the presence of former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency Prime Minister of Ethiopia. You're welcome to this meeting. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to express our sincere gratitude to the government and people of Kenya for the warm reception and hospitality accorded to all the delegation since their arrival in this beautiful city of Nairobi. I would also like to commend the organizers from the different ministries and partners organizations under the leadership and strategic guidance of His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, that worked around the clock on the technical and logistical arrangement required for a successful summit. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to submit to you that climate change is a pandemic in Africa and is responsible for more lives and economic distress. Climate change is resulting in an increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events that causes disasters with compounding effect because they do not allow us to recover before another disaster strikes again. What are we witnessing is the situation thereby government are abandoning development and concentrating their resources in responding to climate-related disaster without building resilience. We know that many African governments, they are using at least 2% of their budget to invest on the disasters, on adaptation programs in the continent, in our continent. Research tells us that some of the African member states are spending up to 50% of their GDP per year in response to climate-induced disasters. The economic losses resulting from climate change stand at more than 5% of the annual GDP for the continent. The bottom line is that the cost of climate change in Africa is too high for us. We know for sure that crying for the promised resources by the developed countries' parties has not yielded tangible results, and even the $100 billion that you promised during the during the Paris Agreement, COP21, up to now, we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen anything. That was the pledge in 2009 to be accessible from 2022. We are in 2023. We haven't seen anything. Please, partners, come and honor your pledge. Has not been reached to Africa. This is despite being their obligation due to their historic responsibility for climate change in line with the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We also know that the cost of addressing climate change is also skyrocketing. For example, the revise of our NDCs for Africa will require an estimated $3 trillion of investment, US dollar investment, to implement, in addition to all the climate action, including NAPS. Africa has refused to wait and die due to climate change. We shall continue to pursue them to honor their obligation, but at the same time, we shall proceed with our own initiatives aimed at building resilience in Africa. I must confess that at the African Union Commission, we are enjoying support for some of our development partners, and so are some of the member states. However, Africa needs to move from a donor-recipient relationship to that built around investment, as that it is the pathway to reaping development aspiration of our continent, the Africa we all want. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the primary goal of this summit is to propel our collective efforts on climate change and sustainable development forward. The fundamental driver of success for African green transition will be the availability of resources for investment, and these must be accompanied by the strengthening of the ability of the African countries to mobilize their own resources, their own domestic resources. And I believe in Africa we can do it. We have the resources. Let us start allocating the resources on the environmental agenda when we are doing our national budget. I believe that we have this capacity. So the fundamental driver of this success, as I say, for African green transition will be the availability of resources for investment, and those must be accompanied by strengthening of the ability of the African country to mobilize our own resources, build on the foundation of solid and inclusive economic growth. As a continent, previous growth models have been predicated largely on the sheep production and export of African raw material with a minimal value addition. We have to start adding value and create jobs for our youth and our women. A continuation of this trajectory will undoubtedly reinforce Africa's vulnerability. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the African continent remains a key player in charting the way forward towards a low-carbon future, despite being the least contributor and yet highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. However, our strength lies in our unity and the fact that we are a continent that is vibrant, fast-growing, useful, young population, energy, and diversity. Our solution for African climate change are rooted in large-scale investment in climate resilience centered on energy access to drive sustainable industrialization. This represents one of the fastest drivers for poverty reduction, while also fundamentally changing the nature of Africa's economic model with large-scale investment in a sustainable value chain. To this end, we continue to put policy framework in place to support the implementation of climate action. Such frameworks include the African Union Climate Change and Resilience Development Strategy and Action Plan. This was adopted by our head of state. We are not here to invent the wheel exists. If you want to partner with us, this is what our head of state adopted, and I invite partners to really align any investment in Africa with this important strategic action on climate change. We didn't have it, but with support of some partners, even the EU, we were able to elaborate and approve it. So I call upon all the partners and our member states to align on this so that we are not trying to multiplicate or duplicate what already exists in the continent. The second strategy, it is the Continental Green Recovery Action Plan and the integrated strategy on meteorology. So all these instruments are strategic and they exist. So if at all we want to tackle all the issues of the challenges of climate change, the tools are there. I'm just inviting investment. Let us find a mechanism where our member state can have access to these capitals, financing resources, so that we can go ahead. We have already done our homework with these tools that was approved. As I conclude, I would like to emphasize the following, that Africa's potential is fostering its sustainable development. It's stable. 3, we need to structurally alter the relationship of African economy within the global economy and reduce the impact of exogenous shocks by building sustainable value chain. This will allow a focus on people and on ensuring the connection between the citizens of Africa and its immense natural health. In this process, we are determined not to be bystander in this, but to lead by doing. Nevertheless, as a continent, we will continue to hold our partners accountable to the promise they made to us. 4, together we aim to elevate the discourse surrounding climate change and rely support for a financial architecture specifically tailored by Africa, while also emphasizing our continent's abundant resources and the resilience as we accelerate our transition towards a climate resilient future. Fifth, as this green transformation is built on this shared determination, I urge us to strongly embrace our collective strengths towards this cause. This summit will be just one step of many towards attaining our objective, which is our Agenda 2063. Six, and lastly, we will count on the support of partners present here today, as well all relevant stakeholders to support the implementation of the summit's outcome. As the African Union Commission, we remain determined and committed to work with member states in addressing climate change, including the implementation of the outcome of this summit, which is the Nairobi Declaration. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention and look forward for a fruitful deliberation. Asante sana, muito obrigada, muitas gracias, merci beaucoup, shukran.
Good job, Your Excellency, with the Swahili. Your Excellency, colleague ministers, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the apex of the opening session of today's ministerial segment of the Africa Climate Summit. And Excellencies, allow me to remind my colleague ministers that we have a very busy day ahead of us. As per the program, we have 3 breakaway rooms, Lenana, Savo, Abadeas, and we shall be guided through that section immediately after the official opening. Allow me, Your Excellency, President of the Republic of Kenya, to thank you most profusely for accepting to grace this ministerial segment to flag us off to a very busy day. And without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to welcome His Excellency, President William Ruto, to make his remarks. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's take our seats. Thank you very much. Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Nairobi. It's called the Green City in the Sun. Welcome to Kenya and welcome to the Africa Climate Summit. I have welcomed you to this great city on behalf of the people and government of Kenya to this meeting that is co-hosted by the Africa Union and the government of Kenya. Let me give you a bit of information that will make it easy to find your way around. Nairobi is a very interesting city. On one side, there's a full canopy forest. And on the other side, we have a wildlife national park. We keep the wildlife in the park because we have a fence. But sometimes, as nature would be, they break away from the fence. So while you are doing your morning walk, you might encounter a lion. Please be careful. It is not tamed, it is wild. Let me also inform you that Nairobi is the home of the United Nations Environmental Programme, the only UN agency headquarters in the global south. So, discussing matters environment, you are in the correct city. And if you need any referencing, the UNEP is right here. Let me also volunteer some additional information that Kenya, a few kilometers from where you are seated, scientists, including myself as a scientist, discovered and located the earliest remains of man on Earth. In other words, this is where humanity began. Before you guys went all over the place, in Europe and America and Asia and the rest of our continent, this is where we all began. And therefore, allow me to welcome you home. And in a few months, we are having a conversation as Kenyans. In a few months, we are seriously considering abolishing any visa requirement because it is unfair to ask anybody coming home for visa. I welcome all the delegates who responded positively to Africa's call to gather at this inaugural Africa Summit. In order for us to imagine, design, and then build a future of prosperity for Africa and the world. You have just stepped into, let me take that again. You have not just stepped into a conference hall. You have entered the future, a future ripe with potential driven by global partnerships committed to African prosperity, inclusive growth, and a livable planet for all of us. Clearly, therefore, this is no ordinary summit. We are not here just to talk about Africa or climate change in the usual way, which often accentuates our divisions. You all remember the North versus South, developed versus developing, polluters versus victims, and the whole of that conversation. And even within our own government, sometimes we have conversations around economic development, so badly needed for us to achieve stable and dignified livelihoods, and is often cast as a trade-off with environmental stewardship as if they are mutually exclusive, when in actual fact, they are positively reinforcing. Let me be clear, these conversations are necessary. Africa's carbon footprint remains small, but the human toll of climate change is disproportionately high. The urgency to address loss and damage and to configure appropriate financial mechanisms for resilience grows with each extreme weather event and each bout of climate-induced insecurity. A complex interplay of needs and responsibilities is a daily challenge, but it should not lead to a deadlock. We must be alert to the fact that they can sometimes blind us to the bigger picture. delivering prosperity and well-being for Africa's growing population without pushing the world deeper into climate disaster is not just an abstract proposition or a mere wishful thinking. It is a real possibility proven by science and affirmed by emerging experience. An opportunity-oriented focus on climate action is the engine for propelling Africa into a realm of stability and prosperity, elevating us to middle-income status and beyond. This context is precisely what sets this climate summit apart from others. It aims to unite us across neighborhoods, across sectors, across institutions, local or international, across country borders, across continents, and across generations. It is because we all have a shared stake in the Earth's ability to sustain life that we must envision together a future that embraces the values of equality, human security, and shared prosperity. Africa possesses all the necessary conditions to realize this future. Our foremost asset is our young and growing young people and workforce, educated, skilled, and motivated to pursue industry, innovation, and enterprise. And we saw them here speak ably this morning. And I congratulate the young people who've been here for the last 3 days, and they have done a tremendous job in the Youth Summit. We have ample renewable energy potential as well, and the natural assets and resources to green our own consumption, but also to meaningfully contribute to decarbonization of the global economy. We must see in green growth not just a climate imperative, but also a fountain of multi-billion-dollar economic opportunities that Africa and the world is primed to capitalize. We are brought together by a clear understanding and deep concern about the inadequacy of our present means in terms of institutions and available finances to deal effectively with the magnitude of our collective threats and challenges. But we will not shy away from the difficult conversations and uncomfortable realities that must be addressed to achieve meaningful change. Policy, regulations, taxation, trade, and climate justice will all be scrutinized in national, regional, global contexts. Yet, the way we frame these discussions matters. I invite all of us to adopt opportunity lens as we navigate these complex dialogues. For a very long time, we have looked at this as a problem. It is time we flipped and looked at it from the other side. There are opportunities, immense opportunities as well. And that is why we are not here to catalogue grievances and list problems. We are here to scrutinize ideas, assess perspectives, so that we can unlock solutions. The very format of this summit has been designed to facilitate such engagement. Over the next 3 days, be ready to be challenged in this dynamic ecosystem of dialogue and discovery. African and global leaders, innovation trailblazers, experts, investors, and captains of industry are here to explore the opportunities, tackle the barriers, and scale up solutions. While I cannot encapsulate the breadth and depth of all our program within my opening remarks, allow me to outline the overarching theme, which is the unparalleled opportunity that climate action represents for Africa. As you're aware, the climate conversation began 31 years ago in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. But this is the first African summit 31 years later. When my colleagues agreed, in the Africa Union that is, agreed to my offer to host this climate summit, it was clear to me that this inaugural summit is going to be the stepping stone to the ultimate resolution of this challenge. The reason why possibly we haven't made much progress is because Africa had not consolidated and assembled its ideas and brought them to the table. I am confident that now going forward, we have all what it takes to create a win-win outcome out of this very intense conversation about climate change. This occasion summons us to contemplate the full range of possibilities that can be unleashed by directing investment and appropriate technology to actualize our continent's abundant resource endowments. Let us look, for example, at food production and the protection and expansion of our invaluable natural carbon sinks, which stand at the intersection of our environment and ecology on one end, and economic opportunities on the other end. Since 1961, Africa has witnessed a one-third reduction in agricultural productivity due to climate change, a stark reminder of the urgent need for adaptation. Yet, much of the world is just waking up to the merits of restorative agriculture, a practice that already resonates with African farming practices. By building on the wealth of indigenous knowledge, we can scale, enhance, and even monetize our agricultural systems. This enables us to unlock the huge potential in our agricultural land assets, representing 2/3 of the world's uncultivated, underutilized arable land, to feed our growing populations and to do so in harmony with our invaluable natural carbon sinks. Additionally, the restoration and expansion of Africa's natural carbon sinks are not just an environmental imperative. In fact, they are an unparalleled economic gold mine. They have the potential to absorb millions of tons of CO2 annually, which should translate into billions of dollars if we were living in a fair world, improve livelihoods, and millions of opportunities across this continent. And I was having a conversation yesterday about a banker of one of the big multinational banks. And he was telling me about Africa's GDP. And GDP is about assets, it's about what you have. We have the carbon sinks that serves the world, cleans our environment, acts as sequestration of carbon that is produced by others. But we get nothing for it. It's not anywhere in our balance sheet. Everybody's assets are in their balance sheet. Some of ours are not in that balance sheet. The day we put our whole assets in our balance sheet, you will know that we are a very wealthy continent. And let me say, we do all that, but it doesn't count for much. But we do it anyway, because we love this world, because it's our home. And that is why the conversation of North versus South must come to an end. Who did what? It's not a conversation that we have the luxury to engage in. Because when the apocalypse happens, it will happen for all of us, for the entire humanity. Let me say this. We do this, and all of this comes while safeguarding our biodiversity. We are careful to make sure that that is in place. Our renewable energy resources are not just environmental necessity. They are the ultimate catalyst of radical socio-economic prosperity. They can fuel sustainable development, drive economic growth, create jobs, and also uplift millions from energy poverty, all while reducing our carbon footprint continentally and globally. The possibilities are not just promising, they are transformative. Africa can power all our energy needs with renewable resources. The continent has enough potential to be entirely self-sufficient with the mixture of wind, solar, geothermal, sustainable biomass, and hydropower. In Africa, we can be a green industrial hub that helps other regions achieve their net zero strategies by 2050. In other words, what I'm saying is unlocking the renewable resources that we have in our continent is not only good for Africa, it is good for the rest of the world. Because we not only are driving our own growth, but we are ready to share these resources with the rest of the world, and by doing so, we will assist the rest of the world in ensuring that we move towards the net zero target that we all set for ourselves. And for Africa, renewable resources, it is not just the volume, but also the non-seasonality of our renewable energy that stands out. The nearly year-round sunshine makes Africa's solar potential particularly unique, perfectly suited to industrial energy demands, something that is challenging in other areas, especially in temperate climates. Kenya, for example, serves as a good example of what is possible. Our national grid currently operates at 3 gigawatts, with 93% of that power being renewable. Our ambition is audacious yet achievable: 100% renewable by 2030 and a 100 gigawatt grid entirely renewable by 2040. A serious challenge in bridging the investment gap in order to enable the continent meet its energy needs is the creation of demand on sufficient scale to provide incentives for appropriate private investment in energy infrastructure development. Industrial energy at scale is therefore necessary to anchor energy demand as a means of tackling the widespread energy poverty still prevalent across our continent. The numbers are stark. Nearly 600 million Africans lack access to electricity. Another 150 million grapple with unreliable power. And almost 1 billion have no access to clean cooking energy. But the abundance of our renewable resources, the possibilities offered by new technologies, and opportunities created by new climate financing offers enormous possibilities for us. We have the capability to provide reliable and cost-effective energy access to all Africans by 2030. The green transformation of both production and consumption is not optional. It is an imperative. The global demand for such solution is already gaining momentum. Our strategic proximity to substantial reserves of metal and minerals necessary for the global energy transition makes Africa an attractive candidate to become a global hub in green industrial supply chain, from refining metals and minerals to constructing and assembling electric motor vehicles, batteries, and other components. Let me invite you to these unprecedented geo-economic opportunities. We are also contributing to a more balanced and stable global economy. It is the only way. We need to do it, and we want to do it together. Trillions of dollars globally are looking for green investment opportunities as the pressure to tackle climate change and crisis heightens. Africa holds the key to accelerating decarbonization of the global economy. It is a statement of fact. Africa holds the key to decarbonizing the global economy, whether it is industrialization, whether it's manufacturing. We are not just a continent rich in resources. We are a powerhouse of untapped potential, eager to engage and fairly compete in the global marketplace. Consider this. Every year, Africa needs to generate approximately 30 million jobs, new jobs for that matter, to accommodate its rapidly expanding workforce. These are not just numbers. They are not just statistics. These are 30 million opportunities to build our future, 30 million dreams that can be fulfilled through climate-proof avenues of growth, and 30 million steps towards shared prosperity. Statistics, they are pragmatic routes for Africa to not only participate in the global economy, but to excel and to grow. I accept that it is one thing to say what is possible, and entirely another to make it happen. For example, infrastructure is expensive. It needs finance and finely tuned policies to attract investors. It needs technical know-how and agile institutions. A major concern that we all know and we all appreciate is cost of capital in Africa, acting as a most prohibitive barrier to our progress. Private investors charge high premiums driven by both real but mostly perceived risks. It is not a secret that we are paying at least 5 times as much as advanced economies to borrow from the financial market. It's a fact, documented. Like many of us, today, I see them differently, as mere tests of our collective will and ingenuity. We should develop effective policies and regulations that catalyze investment and entrepreneurship and unleash the creativity of local business. We must transform Africa's resource wealth from mere potential into real opportunities by directing large-scale investments that will actualize the possibilities that exist and await our citizens in present, direct about what we can commit and bring to the table and the type of the collaborations we need from our global partners. My call to everyone present in this historic summit is for us to work together and converge our efforts on African priorities. I urge everyone to make a contribution to our generation's unprecedented and highly consequential endeavor to catalyze climate action in a spirit of candor, collaboration, and courage. Let us imagine a pathway for different financial structures that can deliver on Africa's goals. Let us commit to invest in viable solutions presented by renewable energy, green industrialization, climate-smart agriculture, and nature conservation. I am confident that we are all inspired by the possibilities before us and galvanized by the demands of this critical time to engage productively, collaborate successfully, and conclude the Africa Summit with a Nairobi Declaration on green growth and climate finance agenda that will commit us to pursue a climate-positive path to propel Africa's economy and promote job creation in a manner that limits our emissions and aids global decarbonization efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to envision a continent that links markets and connects resources with demand, unlocking massive economies of scale, a continent that offers an economic backbone for a decarbonized world, a continent that thrives and shapes climate-proof future for all. So, as we immerse ourselves into the array of complex issues during the summit, let us fix our gaze firmly upon the horizon of possibilities. The future is not just something to hope for. Neither is it something to merely wish or wait for. The future is for us to conceptualize and actualize, starting now. That is what we have come to do at the Africa Climate Summit. Welcome to the future, and I thank you.
One more round of applause to all the speakers who have spoken so well. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we've come to the end of this session, so mine is just to give you some exit protocols. Very simply, we're going to have what we call a family photo with His Excellency, the President. And so we are inviting the AU leadership and all the ministers, including our cabinet secretaries, to join His Excellency for this photo. So what we'll do is that at the point we're exiting, kindly let's allow His Excellency and the leadership to exit first, followed by the ministers. I'll request that we all remain in the room. Then after that, we will be free to take a short break. But for now, we'll all be upstanding kindly as we allow His Excellency, the President, the AU leadership, and the ministers to proceed to the photo shoot. The photo will be taken at the main entrance to KICC. We do have some protocol officers who are going to guide us on that. So we proceed to the main entrance of KICC, where we have an arrangement for all the ministers together with His Excellency the President, to take the family photo. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day.
Bila shaka mtazamaji, hili ni kongamano la mabadiliko ya tabia nchi ambalo limeng'oa rasmi na limeweza kuzinduliwa na Rais wa taifa hili Dr. William Ruto, akiwakaribisha tu wajumbe kutoka mataifa mbalimbali na vile vile marais ambao wameweza kuhudhuria kongamano hili ambalo limeanza kirasmi hii leo na linatarajiwa kuendelea hadi tarehe 6 mwezi huu. Baadhi ya mambo ambayo yameweza kujadiliwa katika ufunguzi wa kongamano hili ni masuala kuhusiana na kufadhili miradi ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, ambapo Rais William Ruto akiongoza wajumbe wengine na marais wengine ambao wameweza kufika katika kongamano hili amesema kuwa ipo haja ya kuweza kuwekeza pesa katika miradi hii ndiposa tuweze kudhibiti makali ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Vile vile ameweza kugusia masuala kuhusiana na nishati mbadala, akigusia tu akiwahimiza wenzake kuweza kuchangia katika kuhakikisha kuwa wanaweza vile vile kuwekeza katika nishati mbadala ili kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa tunadhibiti makali ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Vile vile ameweza kugusia masuala kuhusiana na kaboni, akisema kuwa bara la Afrika ni bara ambalo limekuwa likitoa kaboni ya asilimia chini kabisa, lakini madhara ambayo bara hili limeweza kupata ni madhara mengi sana ikilinganishwa na mabara mengine duniani. Vile vile ameweza kusema kuwa hatutasita kuweza kuangazia ama kuzungumzia masuala ambayo yamekuwa yakikumba bara hili, japokuwa ni mjadala ambao una ugumu, lakini marais na vile vile wajumbe wa mataifa mbalimbali barani Afrika inawapasa waweze kuzungumzia masuala haya ndiposa waweze kudhibiti makali haya ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, ikizingatiwa kuwa kongamano la kwanza kabisa ambalo waliweza kusema kuwa mabadiliko ya tabia nchi ni janga kubwa duniani liliweza kuwa ni takriban miaka 31 iliyopita kule Rio, ambapo baada ya hapo tuliweza kuona kuwa kulikuwa na makubaliano kabambe ambayo yaliweza kuangaziwa ama kufanywa na mataifa. Basi kwa sasa mataifa ya Afrika yatapata fursa mufti kabisa bila shaka vile vile kuweza kutia sahihi na kuweza kuwa na makubaliano ili kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa wanaweza kukabiliana na makali haya ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, kiweza kuzingatiwa kuwa Afrika ni bara ambalo lina mali asili na ukwasi mwingi sana, ambapo tunaweza tu kujifadhili na kujiendeleza, lakini tumeweza kukuwa na vikwazo ambavyo vimeweza kusababisha tusiweze kuendelea. Rais William Ruto ameweza kusema kuwa basi inapaswa vile vile tuweze kuzingatia ukwasi huu wa mali asili na kuwekeza kwa njia dhabiti ili kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa tunapata mapato mazuri. Vile vile ameweza kusema kuwa ujasiriamali utaweza kuendeleza iwapo kutakuwa na mazingira bora ambayo yataweza kutengenezwa na mataifa yote ya bara Afrika. Vile vile ameweza kusema kuwa mataifa yote yanafaa kuangazia kuwa na kawi safi ifikapo mwaka 2030 ili kuweza vile vile kupunguza makali haya ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Mtazamaji, tutaendelea kukuletea picha za moja kwa moja kutoka hapa kwenye ukumbi wa KICC kama unavyoona kwenye runinga yako. Hizo ni picha tu ambapo baadhi ya wajumbe na marais kwa sasa wanapiga picha baada ya ufunguzi wa kongamano hili kirasmi kabisa katika ukumbi huu wa kimataifa wa KICC. Basi haimaanishi kuwa vikao hivi vimesitishwa, bali vinaendelea siku nzima, nasi hapa tupo ngangari kabisa kuweza kuhakikisha kuwa unapata matangazo haya ya moja kwa moja kutoka hapa kwenye ukumbi wa KICC, kwani kutakuwa na majadiliano kabambe ambayo yatakuwa yakiendeshwa na watu aina ainati kuhakikisha kuwa unajua ni yapi ambayo yanajadiliwa na ni yapi ambayo yatakubaliwa na baadhi tu ya wajumbe ambao wameweza kufika katika ukumbi huu wa kimataifa wa KICC. Basi nakuregesha kwa mwenzangu Bentroy Njue ambaye yupo kwenye studio zetu aweze kuendelea na matangazo haya.
We are part of the solution. Africa, rise, rise, Pambazuka. Let us all rise, rise, Pambazuka. Africa, rise, rise, Pambazuka.
PPMC.
Let us all rise, rise, Pambazuka. We are part of the solution. I am part of the solution. We are part of the solution. You are part of the solution. We are part of the solution. I am part of the solution. We are part of the solution. You are part of the solution.
From north, south, east to the west, the beauty of Africa flows. We have all it takes to change the climate story and show ourselves in all our splendor and glory. Yeah. Let's come together now to bring down all barriers for a greater tomorrow. So Africa, arise.
Let us all arise.
Start to be counted. Arise.
Let us all
arise.
We are part of the solution. Part of the solution.
Eh? Ah, that's what I'm saying.